How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Gabriel, Grayfia Rias. Huge shout out to author Konam for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. What is this? A female voiced in clear disbelief at the sight before her, she only being able to look on with wide bewildered eyes, as everything she believed to be true came crashing down around her. Upon first glance the room she found herself in would be described as anything but extraordinary. Bare of all but the most necessary of furnishings, the room could be described as Spartan. The only thing of note being the red satin sheets laid out upon the bed and the crimson flower petals littering the area around the bedside table. The sight however took a turn into the twisted and bizarre as to the onlooker. The crimson blood petals lost their beauty and became nothing more than rivers of blood amidst this painting of madness. For before her, resting on the bedside table in a glass container, was the head of the most important person in her life. A man that had breathed life into her and given onto her guidance and love freely. As he did all his children. Naruto. Father. The voice whispered out in shock before the gravity of the situation suddenly crashed down upon her. Daddy, are you okay? She cried as she quickly ran across the room, her bare feet striking the cold stone tile underfoot at a hurried pace as she rushed towards him. As the moonlight filtered in through the window it revealed a teary-eyed young girl with golden hair that fell down her back in waves of spun gold. She wore a plain sleeveless white dress that stopped just short of her knees. Her fair porcelain-like skin seemed to glisten ethereally as her petite form kneeled down before the glass container. As her sapphire blue eyes settled upon the still countenance of her father's face, she could not help the tears that streamed down her face as she looked on. Her heart aching at the very sight, she took it all in. His face stained with droplets of crimson that could only be his own blood and his eyes closed, she could not help but think his expression a peaceful one. His skin, once tanned to perfection had faded to a ghostly white, while his wild spiky hair had lost its once golden hue and been bleached to a pale gold, slowly descending into silver. It all making him look ever more deathly to her innocent eyes. To see the face of someone she had always held as synonymous with strength and life look as weak and deathly as he did now broke her heart. Glancing upon the glass she saw it stained by a kiss mark directly over where his lips were, and instantly she knew. This was her mother's doing. Yet incapable of feeling hatred, all she felt was the sharp pang of betrayal as it tore through her. Daddy? She uttered softly as she pressed her fingers upon the cold glass of the container, lamenting the fact that she could not brush her fingers over his dimly whiskered cheeks. It just wasn't fair. Never again will she ride his strong shoulders. Never would his strong arms wrap protectively around her and shield her from all that brought her sadness or evoked fear. Never would he again hold her hand. Daddy? She cried out as she broke down into tears while hugging the glass container. Gabriel? A groggy voice sounded out causing her to gasp in shock just as she looked upon her father's decapitated head, just in time to see him let out an exhaustive yawn. Daddy? The now named Gabriel whispered in disbelief, fearing the sight before her to be nothing more than the mere wistful imaginings born from her own inability to accept the truth. What is it baby, night terrors again? He asked tiredly as he opened a single steel gray eye with ripples extending outwards from the pupil. Daddy? She happily cried out as her disbelief turned to relief, a relieved smile on her face as she looked upon her father's confused face. Daddy, you're okay. She cried out before she started hugging the container once more, happy tears streaming down her cheeks at the knowledge of her father being alright. Oh little lamb, what's wrong? Naruto asked as he went wide-eyed from the unexpected action. However, as he attempted to wrap his arms around her, he remembered his current state as he found himself incapable of doing so. Oh. I missed you so much daddy. I was so scared when I found you like this, I thought you might be dead, she choked out amidst her tears. The awesome and all-powerful Naruto dead never. I would never dream of leaving my little lamb all by herself, you and your mother are too important to me to allow myself to die. He said passionately. Really, you won't ever leave me? You'll stay by my side forever and ever? She asked amidst her sniffles, her puffy red eyes looking straight at him with equal parts hope and apprehension. Forever and ever, cross my heart and hope to eat cake. He said animatedly with a mischievous smile on his face, the statement causing Gabriel to smile at her papa's silliness. Pinky promise, Gabriel asked as she held out her pinky finger expectantly. I would, but as I'm sure you may have noticed I've lost a little weight, he jokingly said as he looked down at where the rest of his body should be only to come up short. The statement causing her to blush at her own lack of forethought on what she had said. Who was it that did this to you papa, was it mother? She questioned as she ran her fingers over his glass prison, attempting to find a way to free him. However, as her fingers trailed over the glass, numerous blue lines spread outwards as the surface of the container rippled, revealing the powerful magic around it to be fighting her actions in attempting to free her father. I'm afraid so. She deemed it fit to help me shed a few pounds after the Morning Star incident when she found me spending time with the North Star to balance things out. Apparently she suspected me of corrupting her angels and causing them to fall from grace, even though it was her that was so insistent on giving them free will. He explained. So she cut off your head? Gabriel asked in disbelief. Out of love. He defended with an insane smile on his face that elicited a sigh from her. At that I mean she came up to me in her cute child form and politely asked me not to resist as she cut off my head. It was so adorable. He gushed, as if I could say no to my wife when she goes all lowly on me. He said as he blushed in remembrance. I still say you need to be a bit firmer with her, Dad. I mean look where complacency has gotten you. Gabriel said as she regarded his current bodiless state. Oh, this? A minor inconvenience at most, I assure you. Honestly, the only reason I haven't given myself a new body was because I gave your mother my right eye. I mean, do you know the things I can do as just a head? Why, she didn't even carve out my tongue. Naruto laughed insanely as he stuck out his tongue to reveal one of the most intricate seal matrices she had ever seen to be imprinted upon it. Thousands upon thousands of seals all perfectly interlocking with one another in order to create a single seal array, which took the appearance of his own unique seal. Instantly she paled at the sight. With that alone she knew her father was not bluffing. If he had wanted to, he could have ended all creation even in his weakened state. All he would need to do was bite his own tongue in order to activate the seal matrix, and she doubted any god would have been capable of stopping the ensuing fallout. But that one eye, the seal on his tongue, and whatever other nasty surprises her father had at his disposal, he was more than a match for any would-be god, even her own mother. This is nothing more than a mere lover's quarrel in my eyes, a misunderstanding born from the manipulations of the Morning Star. I will enjoy ripping her pretty little heart out of her chest for her betrayal, and take great pleasure in seeing the light fade from her eyes as I correct my mistake. He said with a dark smile, prompting her to only nod as she continued her efforts to free her father. Now let it be said that her father loved all his creations, however there were a great many deal of beings and creatures that were not born of his will, but rather that of others. Those while he cared for, he unlike his wife, could not find it in his heart to love as his own. Then there were those such as the Morning Star. Her father, as usually complacent as he was to simply allow his wife to run things, was not one to be crossed. For he was as wrathful as they came, and any perceived slight upon him would be repaid in blood. You killed one of his children. He would descend such manner of reckoning upon your kingdom that the cries of every babe across the land would be silenced forever. Wait, you gave mother one of your eyes after she cut off your head? Gabriel asked in disbelief as what he had said finally struck her. Yes, she later apologized and regretted cutting of my head rather than that of that wench Morning Star. She said she needed my help to stop a great calamity that was supposed to end the world of man and begged me to help. However, due to my body being indisposed at the moment and we being pressed on time, I simply gave her one of my eyes. He explained before he was stricken by a thought. Now that I think about it, how did she do? There was a war at around the same time, wasn't there? Did she kick ass? Naruto asked with a smirk as he entertained the thought of his wife in her lowly form, fighting against an entire army. At that Gabriel took a downcast expression as a small frown came over her face and her golden bangs shadowed her features from view. She's dead, she whispered lowly, wiping his usual mad smile from his face for a second before it came back full force. What was that, my little lamb? I couldn't quite catch that. He asked her with an ominous smile. Raising her head she looked at her father with tears in her eyes. She's dead. Mommy died in the Great War. She cried. Michael told me everything, of how she sealed an evil monster and in her weakened state tried to, she said before she broke down into tears and started weeping. Suddenly however she felt a chill crawl up her spine, causing her breath to catch in her throat for a moment, silencing her cries. Glancing towards her father she managed to catch sight of his face contorted in fury and his soul eye having descended from its usual steel gray to an ominous blood red. It was the first time could recall seeing her father honestly angry. The moment where the world finally stopped being a mere game to him and he became serious about whatever he had set his mind on doing. However, just as fast as it had appeared it was gone. His face set once more in that amiable smile of his that she had grown so fond of. Wipe those tears away, little lamb, for I can promise you with utmost certainty that your mother, my wife, still lives. He said soothingly as that loving side of him came to play. You see, she can't die. I won't allow her to, especially considering I have this, he said as he opened his other eye, only to reveal it to be a sapphire blue with a white cross cutting across it. Before quickly closing it again. I can't use it properly at the moment due to her current condition, however, as long as a piece of her still lives, she can't die. He assured, plus the rest of my body is currently resting besides her. See, I just squeezed her butt, he said with a smirk, before becoming serious again. What I think happened was that she exhausted her energy reserves in sealing this beast of yours and entered some sort of deep sleep as a result. I believe that if I can reattach my head to the rest of my body and actually get there, I should be more than capable of waking her. He explained, causing Gabriel's expression to brighten at the news. However, even I don't know where my body may be, as something is interfering with my sensing abilities in that location. All that I know is that it's in a 364 square feet large room with no doors or windows that was created by my wife. That and the fact that we're both laid out on a bed. He started thoughtfully before backtracking at Gabriel's eager look. Such information, however, can be misleading, considering it was her that made it. For all we know, it can exist in a separate dimension like this one, or even be the size of a grain of sand. He added before she got too excited, immediately causing her to deflate at that before she brightened up once more. Well, that's fine, all we need to do is find your body and it's problem solved then, right? She asked with a large smile at that. I suppose so, there's still the issue of waking your mother and taking care of the morning star, but asides from that. Yeah, that's pretty much it, as long as nothing else comes up. He said aloud as he listed his main objectives minus his more private ones. Then all we need to do is get you out of here and have Michael help. He took over after Mom died, disappeared. She explained before correcting herself mid-sentence, now that she knew the truth. No kidding. Naruto said in mild surprise. Little Michael, the mama's boy, stepped up to take up the big chair. How it's treating him? He asked curiously, causing Gabriel to frown as she continued to try to break the intricate seal work on the container. Not good, things have been strained with the devils and fallen angels recently. I imagine mother told you about them? Gabriel asked, getting a contemplative frown from her father. The first time she told me about them in any great detail she cut off my head, so I had more pressing concerns at the moment, and the second time it was all rushed really, and I only got the tail end of the 3-faction system. He explained a bit with a contemplative frown, getting a nod from her. That's fine, I'll tell you what I know later. Anyways, there's a sort of strained truce right now, but honestly there's no telling how much longer that will last. All 3 factions are scared of fighting now that Mom's out of the picture, because they fear that if any of the other factions beyond the Bible 3 find out that God died, they will finish off the 3 factions, now that they are weakened. She explained. Weakened, you say? He repeated to himself with a maniacal grin as he started to seriously reconsider his own non-interference policy. However, I have heard Big Brother mention something about a place called Kuo in Japan, referring to it as a melting pot of supernatural activity, and about how big things are supposed to happen there in the coming years. She recited from memory, causing Naruto to take on an interested expression at that. Oh, did he now? Then that's where we'll start looking. Naruto said with a large grin just as the defenses around the glass container cracked and fell apart. Got it? Gabriel cheered, before suddenly the moon outside became red and the smile slipped from her face, while Naruto's only widened. Not quite, he said with a dark smile before a large monstrous bellow sounded out in the distance. You better run, these angels are no winged saints, of that I can assure you. He warned, prompting her to speed up her efforts as she quickly picked up the glass container that held his head. Be careful, I'm fragile, he teased as she picked him up and held him tightly to her chest, she struggling to hold him in her small arms as she quickly fled from the room. Running as fast as her little legs could carry her into the adjoining hall, she tried to get to exit as quickly as possible. May I recommend changing to your adult form? I fear that your child form, as cute as it may be, is at a slight disadvantage at the moment. He said just as a roar sounded off just behind her as the sound of something crashing through a wall could be heard, causing her to turn around, only to hear a cry as whatever it was that entered the hall was quickly launched out the hole they had entered from. I also must warn you against looking back, it takes time, and frankly they are quite unpleasant to look at, Naruto idly commented as his eyes glowed ominously, prompting her to start running again. What is it, what's chasing after us? She asked hurriedly as she descended a flight of stairs. Angels in name only though. Truthfully, they are basically guard dogs that look like monsters, but hey, your mother calls them angels, so who am I to argue with her? She made them, she can call them whatever she may damn well please. He said as he started rambling. Focus. She shouted as she snapped him out of it and prevented him from veering off topic. Oh yes, the life and death situation, he said disinterestedly as he snapped back to the problem at hand. How about you change out your lowly form into your adult form now and fly us to the exit? He suggested in a matter-of-fact tone. Look, I would if I could, but this place restricts all holy energy to almost nothing. Quite ingenious really, considering only someone with holy energy can enter this place. Can't you do something about this though? She asked, getting a smile from him at that. Oh, most assuredly, in fact, he said as his left eye glowed with power and she suddenly found herself filled with holy energy, enough so for her halo to manifest and a golden hue to encompass her form. She coming to a sudden stop at the overwhelming power that suddenly filled her. Now about that adult form, he suggested with a grin, prompting her to close her eyes before all the holy energy inside of her burst free as the light fully encompassed her. There where one stood a frightened young girl was an extremely beautiful woman with long curly blonde hair and a voluptuous figure. Clothed in an elegant white dress she stood with all the grace of nobility as 12 golden wings trailed behind her ethereally and a golden halo hovered behind her head. Light seemed to freely emanate from her being as she bathed the surrounding landscape beneath her golden glow. Definitely her mother's daughter. I don't mind this, not one bit. Naruto exclaimed happily as he was held tightly against Gabriel's breasts. Smiling at her father's commentary, she could not help but feel a burst of joy at being compared to someone as beautiful as her mother. Come on dad, let's get out of here, whatever those angels were they seemed to have backed off after they sensed holy energy. She said as she spread her wings and prepared to fly them all the way to where she knew the exit to be. Actually I have a better idea, he said before he opened his right eye for a split second and created a mirror with a swirling vortex before them, startling her at that. Why didn't you do that to start off with? She questioned with a raised eyebrow as she looked down curiously at Naruto, not really feeling anger at him having withheld from her that he could do such a thing, only confusion. Because it hurt like hell, that's why. He shouted back as she noticed his right eye to be bleeding. Your eye? She cried out in shock. No, my wife's eye, he corrected. Like I told you I can't use it properly in the current state she's in, he reminded her. Then why did you? Gabriel asked curiously, sure it would take a little while to reach the exit, but it was not worth seeing her father in pain just to circumvent. To move things along a bit faster, to reward you for entering your adult form, and because frankly I'm not entirely convinced you would not drop me mid-flight. He listed one by one. I wouldn't ever drop you. She fiercely declared, aghast at the very thought of such a thing. Whatever, let's just get out of here, Naruto said disinterestedly, not really wanting to argue with his daughter, even whilst knowing what a klutz she could be. Gabriel, quickly making her way over to mirror, quickly pressed the palm of her free hand that was currently not busy holding her father's head against the mirror, causing the glass that separated her from the swirling vortex just beyond it to ripple underhand. In a second all her color seemed to drain into the mirror before in a sudden flash of light she was gone. 7th Heaven God's Chambers. In an elegant room that held a striking resemblance to the one the heavenly pair had just left could be seen a grand-looking mirror with an intricate silver frame. Shimmering ethereally for a moment as it pulsed with some unknown energy, a female figure found herself appearing in the room in a sudden flash of light as she tumbled forwards as she was deposited on the ground. She being accompanied by the sound of glass breaking and a pained cry. I just knew it. I knew you would drop me. Naruto shouted as his head laid face down amidst the shattered remains of his container. Ah, are you okay, Father? Gabriel cried worriedly as she scrambled over towards her father's head and gingerly picked him up. I didn't mean to drop you, it was an accident, promise. She apologized as she turned him over to find him with a pout on his face, only to be met with her earnest expression. Ah, your face, she commented as she noticed the large shard of glass had apparently embedded itself in the center of his forehead. What's wrong with my face? He demanded in a mild panic. Oh no, nothing's wrong with it, you're just as handsome as ever. She quickly placated seeing his panicked expression as she offered him a calming smile, she causing him to blush embarrassedly at the compliment. Always the flatterer, aren't you? He said embarrassedly, obviously giddy at receiving such a compliment. Why, I don't find you attractive or cute at all, after all, it's not fitting for a father to harbor romantic feelings for his daughter. It doesn't matter that you're my favorite, after all we all play favorite sometimes, right? He said as he went off into his own little world, he carefully reciting the line that his wife had instilled into him concerning his many attractive daughters midway before descending back into his fantasy. Only truly half listening to her father's thanks and self-assurances, she focused on the task at hand, removing the knife large shard currently embedded into his forehead that her father apparently failed to even acknowledge. Part of the benefits of being an immortal and seemingly invincible primordial deity, she supposed. I didn't enjoy being pressed against your breasts earlier, it was just my lack of contact with others manifesting itself, Naruto continued as he ventured into full-blown denial, while not paying any attention to what his daughter was doing. Yeah, just need to remove this one little thing. She said as she yanked on the shard with each word before finally pulling it free. However, she completely didn't expect what happened next. The moment that she liberated the glass shard from her father's unusually thick skull, she was greeted by a jet of blood from the wound that fully drenched her entire upper body in the thick viscous crimson fluid. It was honestly out of proportion how much blood he produced from what he could contain in his current state of a mere head, especially considering the fact she doubted most humans contained the amount of blood he was releasing in their entire bodies, let alone their heads. In mere seconds he had covered her upper body with a sticky substance, as well as painted most of the wall behind her crimson as well. Oops, she voiced with a sweat drop as she looked down at Naruto, who looked incredibly dizzy at all the blood he had just lost. Gabriel-sama, it's time for dinner. I brought you your favorite, it's cheerfully announced a brown-haired angel wearing a maid's outfit as she opened the door to the room with a wide smile on her face, whilst she carted in a tray filled with food, only to come up short at the sight that greeted her. There kneeling on the floor with a decapitated head on her lap was her beloved and gentle master Gabriel. She being fully covered in blood and with the rest of the room, looking eerily reminiscent of the aftermath of a gruesome murder. Clutched idly in her bloody hand was a large blood-stained shard of glass that looked just vicious enough to be capable of carving out your heart. Most unsettling of all was when her lady turned to her with the same smile she usually wore whilst covered in blood and cheerfully greeted her, as if nothing was amiss with this picture of madness that had greeted her. "Hi Layla." Gabriel cheerfully greeted. "Could you please set that on the tabletop over there for a bit, I currently have my hands full at the moment and it may be a bit before I can get to it," she said happily. The now named Layla simply continued to stand idly at the doorframe with that same wide smile she had worn on her way in. Gabriel, finally registering what the current situation must look like to her handmaiden and observing her currently strained expression, decided to explain herself before a misunderstanding arose. "Layla, this isn't what it looks like," Gabriel started in the most calming voice she could muster, only to be met by her handmaiden's continued strained smile. Suddenly Layla's eyes rolled back onto her head as she collapsed in place and fell back with a thud, the food following shortly after as it spilled all over her, causing Gabriel to hiss in sympathy. "What happened?" Naruto groggily got out as he slowly recovered from his loss of blood and regained his bearings. "Who that?" he asked as he noticed the currently unconscious maid lying in the doorway. "A friend," Gabriel hesitantly offered. Moments later the sight of Layla's unconscious body being dragged into the room before the door was locked behind her followed. "Please, I said I was sorry, didn't I? Please forgive me, Daddy," Gabriel begged as she clasped her hands together and looked at her father's head pleadingly. She couldn't stand the thought of her father being mad at her, it would kill her inside. Currently the entire room was a mess with half of it being covered in blood, with a very clear outline of her against the far wall where she herself had blocked a good majority of the blood spray that ensued from her trying to play doctor. Gabriel was currently drenched in blood while she looked at the completely healed head of her father, the large gash on his forehead, now nothing more than a mere memory. Currently the angel Layla was lying off to the side on the part of the room that wasn't stained crimson with a pillow under her head. Naruto was currently looking with an angry pout off to the side while giving his daughter the figurative cold shoulder, considering he didn't have an actual one to spare at the moment. However, it wouldn't take long under his daughter's cute puppy dog eyes until he finally cave in and forgive her. That didn't mean he couldn't give her a hard time over it though. "I don't know, I might be too stupid to apologize now, especially considering the fact that my brains have been splattered all over the wall," he shouted, causing her to cry cutely at that as she bawled her eyes out at the fact that her beloved daddy was angry at her. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Daddy, please don't hate me," she begged, causing his tough front to crack as he looked at her piteously. "I love you, Daddy, please please." She managed to get out amidst her strangled cries as she threw herself on the ground and started flailing around, something that looked all the more awkward as she was in her adult form. Finally getting fed up with the waterworks and thinking that he wouldn't be able to take any more of his little lamb's mournful bleating, he gave in. "Fine, calm down, it's not even that big of a deal honestly. Just a minor inconvenience is all." "Wow, I forgot how highly you valued my opinion, Gabriel. You would think I was asking you to cut off your own wings with how much you're crying." "Really?" she hopefully asked amidst her sniffling while wiping her tears away. "You really forgive me?" she asked as she looked at him with teary hopeful eyes. "Yes, I forgive you, just be more careful with me, alright? I'm delicate," he proclaimed with a posh look, causing his daughter to gain a look of understanding at that as she looked elsewhere. "Like a flower?" she asked excitedly. "Yes, just like a wait, what?" he asked as he looked towards her confusedly before she turned him so he could see what was next to God's bed in the real world. There on the bedside table where he had been situated in mirror world was a glass container holding a single red rose where he had been in his wife's parallel world, as if homage to their love. "So I was a rose on her bedside table, she was always such a hopeless romantic, my wife," he said with a small loving smile. "Oh, that's so romantic. An eternal rose for an eternal love," she gushed. "It's just too cute," she cooed as she hugged his head tightly into her bosom amidst his half-hearted protests. Naruto could not help but think that considering his current situation, things could be worse. For one, he could not have an extremely attractive female willing to lug his head around. After spending centuries completely cut off from any sort of contact or companionship, it was a welcome change. It wasn't long afterwards that the two decided that the best course of action to take at the moment was to present the situation to Michael in order to get the necessary assistance to start their search. They would work out their next step after they knew what they had to work with and talk to newly titled God. Sneaking out of God's chambers was easy enough, getting to God's throne where Michael currently resided was a different matter altogether. Especially when your group consists of a blood-covered seraph and a decapitated head. Knowing the panic their current appearances could evoke, they decided it would be in their best interests to try to avoid as many possible encounters as possible. However, considering their destination, such a thing was inevitable. Sixth heaven. I thought I heard something over here, a male angel remarked as he shone a lantern into a currently unused room and looked inside curiously. It was likely just one of the spirit children running about dusting the place, the little dears. A female angel handmaiden cooed after him, causing him to hang his head in acceptance at that. I suppose you're right, he admitted with a smile before he heard a sound come from a nearby wardrobe, causing him to turn towards it curiously. Strange, the spirit children were usually so diligent in not touching things in the physical world after all. Father, you're going to have to stop moving so much or you'll give us away. Easy for you to say, you're not the one being suffocated to death. SHH, he's looking this way. Frowning, the male angel made his way over towards the wardrobe as his curiosity got the best of him. He could distinctly make out something that sounded like whispers coming from it, and spirit children's voices could not be heard outside of the third heaven, only their laughter. Walking over towards the wardrobe, he noticed something a bit off about it, inspecting it for a few seconds, and noticing nothing amiss, his frown deepened further in confusion. Taking a step back as he looked at it, he could not help but feel this sense of unease that settled over him while it loomed over him. Now, normally he wasn't supposed to touch anything in the unused rooms, as they were left unoccupied either in honor or a saint or high-ranking angel, but this time he could not deny that he was tempted to open it. Inside there was supposed to be only the robes of an angel or saint, but maybe, just maybe, there was something else. Suddenly his highly sensitive hearing picked up on something: was that breathing? Pressing his ear as close as he dared to the wardrobe, he heard nothing. Backing off in confusion, he suddenly felt a cold wind sweep over him, only to turn to see a window slightly open in the room. Maybe this was what he heard. The whispering of the wind, the breath of life. Walking over to the window, he closed it shut before looking thoughtfully back at the wardrobe. Are you done telling off the spirit children for breaking something yet? A voice cheerfully rang out from the hall as a dark-haired angel popped her head into the room with a grin, causing him to laugh at her statement. Nah, no spirit children here, just an open window from their last cleaning. He said with a smile as he gestured to said window. Then what are you standing around for? We have places to be, things to clean, food to cook. The female angel excitedly proclaimed as she led her male companion down the hall. An angel's duty is never done. The male angel agreed with a smile as he made to close the door to the room behind them, he casting a final glance at the wardrobe in the process. An angel's duty is never done, he quietly repeated once more before closing the door softly behind him with a resounding click. After a few seconds of silence, a shuffling sound could be heard in the room before a male voice sounded out. Are they gone? Naruto asked from his spot currently atop Gabriel's chest. Let me check, Gabriel responded as she peeked from their hiding place for a moment before deciding the pair of angels weren't coming back. Yep, they're gone, she confirmed. Good, let's continue on then. Naruto declared just as Gabriel slid the door to their hiding place open, revealing it to be a closet with a sliding door directly besides the wardrobe. They having crammed themselves into the bottom portion of it as the upper portion was filled with folded towels. That was close, good thing luck was on our side, that and the fact he got distracted with this wardrobe. She breathed in relief. I prefer to call myself a miracle worker, Naruto said with fake snobbishness at her statement. Oh, I forgot, you're the god that has taken it upon himself to handle coincidence, haven't you? She said as she remembered the fact that her father had once told her that he was actually quite firm on him holding sole claim to such a position, as in his words, if you control coincidence you control probability, if you control probability you control luck. And if you control luck there is no force in this or any universe that could ever hope to best you. Then it's inevitably thanks to you that the window was open. She asked as she knew that he couldn't have done it now, as he was trying to go below the radar at the moment in order to not tip off all of heaven that he was back. Possibly, I may or may not have had a hand in it, he answered with a mysterious smirk. I mean, it's not like I would orchestrate this entire encounter decades in advance, just so I could be crammed inside of a tiny closet with you now, would I? He suggested with a small mischievous smile. Wouldn't you? She asked back with a smile of her own before a thought suddenly struck her. Wait, wouldn't that mean that you orchestrated me finding you after all these years as well? She asked as she looked at him with a puzzled expression, only to be met by an insane grin from him. Did I? He asked back, only confusing her ever further at the fact that he did not outright deny her statement. Didn't you? She asked, honest to God confused at this point at what he was getting to. Spotting her father's maddening smirk widen at her confusion, she pouted as she realized he was likely just teasing her. Fine, don't tell me. I bet the only reason you wanted to be god of coincidence was to make people doubt everything that happens as such, so that you can take credit for it. She declared with a huff, causing him his smirk to widen at that. Possibly, he said as he looked off to the side, causing her to groan at that. Yep, just like her father, alright, never a straight answer with the guy. However, even amidst her current frustration, she couldn't help but smile. For how long had she craved for this, to partake of their playful banter again, to be target of his silly teasing once more. She loved and cherished all their interactions and had missed him dearly over the last few centuries. To have him back in her life was like a dream come true for her. A dream that she had worked tirelessly to make a reality. Hey, how about you look into that wardrobe over there to see if there's something inside, he suggested with a smile as he referred to the wardrobe the angel from earlier seemed quite captivated by. Shrugging, Gabriel decided to follow her father's advice as she walked over towards said wardrobe with him in hand. Reaching out towards the currently unoccupied hand, she pulled it open only to find it empty. Looking back at her father, she found him wearing a grin as he looked inside, confusing her. However, when she turned back to the wardrobe, she found a large glowing magical crest inside of it, causing her to take a step back in surprise before she distinctly felt herself being sucked into the wardrobe. Determined not to get caught up in whatever trap her father had just tricked her into springing, she quickly tried to run away with him, only for every step away from the drawer to take a gargantuan effort as the magic locked onto her energy signature as it threatened to suck her in. Naruto. Gabriel cried out in shock as she was swallowed into the spiraling vortex inside the wardrobe, along with the laughing head of her father. Onward, to Narnia. Naruto laughed just as the wardrobe door slammed shut behind the two and silence descended upon the room once more. You're insane, Gabriel jokingly proclaimed as the two neared Michael's current location. I believe the term you're looking for is asinine, he corrected with a mocking smirk before it fell off his face as he considered what he just said. Wait, no, what I meant was. No, asinine, summed it up pretty well there, Dad. She said as she used his own words against him, not exactly how I would word it and a bit self-depreciating coming from you, but I suppose if you say so, she said teasingly, causing him to sputter indignantly at that as he attempted to correct the misunderstanding. So far they had somehow teleported to a laundry chute elsewhere on the 6th floor and after digging themselves from the laundry pile, were currently trying to figure out a way to enter the throne room. As it turned out, her father had numerous little shortcuts and secret passages all throughout heaven that he had created long ago in order to play with the spirit children and to get from place to place in a timely manner. What her father had yelled out earlier, Narnia, was apparently an actual location in the third heaven where children that had suffocated inside confined spaces due to lack of parental supervision went, at least according to her father. In reality, it was a place where the souls of dead children could happily enjoy a fantasy setting in the afterlife and live out their dreams. Right now she was currently trying to think of a way to get into the throne room and bypass the two armor-clad angels currently guarding the entranceway. Their golden armor glimmering ominously as they held their swords at the ready with their large white wings folded against their back. Their helmets were beset with 3 feathers, 2 white ones streaked with red from either of them to symbolize their blood bond and a single golden feather to symbolize their fealty to their lord on high. How about you just walk through them? Naruto suggested as he observed Gabriel trying to think of how to approach the situation. Not being able to think of a better option, she decided to take his suggestion and just wing it. Going around the corner where she was observing them from, she quickly walked up to the stunned guards who seemed too shocked to question her as they saw her covered in blood holding a decapitated head. Smiling at them, she uttered a pleasant greeting as her father cheerfully greeted them, the two only being able to look on dumbfounded at the sight of their lady holding a talking head of all things. I mean, this was their lady, sister of their lord who they were supposed to serve, they simply did not know how to address such a thing. Entering the room, the two quickly saw Michael sitting on a throne with a peaceful expression on his face as he looked through a scroll of parchment. Michael was a handsome-looking man with long blonde hair and green eyes, shaped in a perpetually sad manner, as if burdened with all the sin and bloodshed of the world. And contrary to Gabriel's naive and cheerful disposition, his was wise and saddened. Kind yet thoughtful, this was the Naruto and God's first joint creation, the archangel and current god of heaven Michael. Big brother, I bear great news. Gabriel cheered as she barged into his throne room, startling him, the 2 angel guards from before trailing after her as the other guardian angels in the room looked at her in shock at her appearance. Gabriel, big brother is very busy right at the moment, now that mom's gone I have a lot of responsibilities to attend to, and I can't. It's mother, she's alive. Gabriel cried happily, causing Michael to go wide-eyed at the proclamation as the scroll dropped lifelessly from his hands and fell onto the floor. What did you say? A startled Michael asked as only for his breath to catch in his throat at the sight of his blood-covered sister looking at him with an unsettling grin. I said mother lives, and that's not all, look who I found. She said as she held out their father's smiling head towards Michael. Sup, Naruto said with a large smile before Gabriel moved his head over to the side slightly and gave Michael a beaming smile. It's daddy. She cheered, isn't this great, with this we can be a family again. You, me, mommy and daddy, we can fix everything. she said excitedly before she noticed her brother was not partaking of her current excitement. Looking at him in confusion, she was surprised to see him with an undecipherable expression as he looked intently at their father's decapitated head. Casting his sea-green eyes towards her with a mournful expression, he spoke. However, when he addressed her, it was no longer as a brother to a sister, but as God to an angel under his wing. "You poor child, you have no idea what you have just done," he said piteously as he stood up and formed a magical sphere underhand connecting to the heaven system. This being just as unimaginable, pain coursed through Gabriel, causing her to cry out in pain as she dropped to her knees while clutching the head of her father abreast. "It hurts," she got out through gritted teeth while gasping in pain as lightning arced around her. "Daddy, big brother." She cried out in pain as tears streamed down her cheeks as her wings' plumage faded to a menacing black, marking the start of her descent from grace. Michael, quickly activating the heaven system, created an intricate web of magical seals with numerous depictions of the angel symbolic crest. However, this only seemed to cause her more pain, as the array could not contain the vast fluctuations of energy from an angel of Gabriel's caliber and caused it to lash back at her as it tried to stop her from falling. Spinning the orb in hand, his attempts to fix the issue only seemed to make it worse. That was when he noticed it. The color was fluctuating between black and gold. Her pure heart was overriding the process of falling. Amazing, he thought in awe at his sister's pure soul that was akin to ascending back to grace after falling. Only those angels that had truly repented for their sins and spent decades of utter devotion were usually capable of rejoining heaven. However, at this point he doubted she even knew what she had done. Was her innocence so great that it simply made her incapable of being corrupted? "Enough!" Naruto roared as the entire containment array malfunctioned as his power washed over the room. Michael, sensitive to the manipulations of holy energy, felt a massive influx of it all rush into Gabriel as her back arched and her wings exploded behind her in a shower of gold. Her 12 golden wings shimmering with all the raw brilliance of his own as her fall was countered by Naruto's will to keep Gabriel entrenched in the light. "Gabriel, are you alright?" Naruto asked worriedly just before Michael himself could ask the same. I don't know, what was that?" Gabriel asked as she managed to reclaim her senses and lifted her head weakly. "That was what happens when you start to waver, that's what happens when you go against the will of God." Michael cut in as he looked sadly towards his sister. "What is the meaning of this, Michael?" Naruto demanded as he narrowed his eyes at the current Lord of Heaven. Ignoring his father, he continued, "I knew that God lives, for as long as faith in her is not lost, neither is she. The sole reason I did not tell you was to discourage you from looking for her, for you see she has not returned to us for a reason. That thing in your hands is no God, that is blasphemy incarnate, father of sin and progenitor of madness." She sealed him away long before the Trihexa. Unchecked, his powers threatened all creation, yet she knew that even with her own vast powers, she could not hope to match a being such as him. So she employed the most powerful of all virtues in order to keep him at bay. Love, he said, surprising Gabriel greatly at this. "Wow, did you come up with that bullshit story all by yourself?" Naruto said condescendingly as he looked on at Michael in apparent awe. Gritting his teeth, Michael continued, "Splitting his power into three, she sealed him away for the good of all mankind," he declared. "Mankind? Since when have I ever given a shit about mankind?" He interrupted again, causing Michael to frown at him at that as he stopped his diatribe in order to address his father. "It is that very kind of thinking that has led us to where we are today, father. That apathy and lack of concern is what dims the radiance of a pure soul. Humanity is a shadow of its former self, the humane have become the forgotten. Amidst the starving, the sick, the filthy, the poor, what is humane has perished in favor of a concept of individuality that borders on the narcissistic," Michael explained before Naruto suddenly broke out into a maddening grin as it all suddenly clicked for him. "I get it now," Naruto laughed. "You failed," he thundered, causing the very heavens to shake upon his proclamation as every angel stopped mid-action and Michael took on a startled expression. "You could not handle the weight of the world upon your shoulders, you could not fill the void left by the absence of God, and thus you seek to justify yourself. Do you intend to make me your black sheep, Michael, the scapegoat to all your failures and justification for your actions? Do you truly intend to vilify me, your own father?" Naruto roared with sheer fury in his eyes at what he was hearing. Michael, not one to be intimidated, pressed on. "Mother gave everything to seal you away. You know nothing of how much it pained her to do so, to put a stopper to your madness. It tore her heart," he shouted in remembrance as tears brimmed in his eyes. "Sealed me away?" Naruto roared in outrage. "What sort of delusions have you blinded yourself with, Michael? What happened arose from nothing more than a mere misunderstanding. I am no monster," Naruto shouted back. "I know what I saw," Michael declared fiercely, taking Naruto and Gabriel aback at seeing Michael, who was usually the calmest and most level-headed of the Seraphs, lose his cool like that. "Your words, they're nothing more than lies. Lies that breed more lies. You're beyond redemption. Guards, seize him." Michael ordered, as the numerous guardian angels in the room bore their arms against him, only for them to hesitate. Gabriel, while unable to follow what was being said too thoroughly, understood that her brother was in some way against her father and was insistent on bringing some manner of harm upon him. That and the fact that her brother had apparently withheld important information from her on the basis of making her more agreeable with his decisions and disenchanting her from searching out her father. It didn't take her long to decide her stance concerning the situation. Quickly materializing a spear of light underhand, she held the head of her father protectively to herself as she dared the other angels to try to take him from her. She had only just managed to get him back, there was no force on this earth that could hope to rip him from her. She didn't care if she fell for opposing Michael or for going against God's will. All that she cared about was that they were together and she would be willing to fight all of heaven and earth to keep it that way. Naruto, seeing the guardian angels in the room hesitating and following Michael's command, decided to capitalize on this apparent lack of faith that they held in Michael's judgment. For where there was hesitation there was doubt, and where there was doubt there was a weakness he could exploit. Go on, do it, obey your God. Naruto shouted as he goaded the hesitant angels on whilst mocking Michael's new title, let's see all of heaven fall from grace on this day, as the son sheds the blood of the father in vengeance. He proclaimed with a mad grin directed at the fuming Michael. This is not vengeance. Michael thundered as all of heaven quaked beneath his power, this is rightful retribution. As he formed a javelin of light that burned with all the fury of the heavens themselves in hand and slammed it into the ground with a resounding boom. An eye for an eye, huh? Naruto asked with a smirk as Michael's eyes of pure light burned into him, your mother and I know that saying very well, why you could say we exemplify it. He laughed as he opened his other eye and revealed his wife's currently deactivated eye in its dormant state, shocking the onlookers at that. How did you get your hands on that? Mother would never entrust something of such importance to you. Michael demanded as he saw the eye of God in possession of his father of all people. Believe it or not, your mother is smarter than you seem to think. She came to me before the war and begged me for my help. Knowing that even in my weakened state I was still the most powerful being in all creation, she pleaded with me to help her save the world of man. Naruto announced, he taking great pleasure at the fury that came across Michael's face at the very thought of his mother needing his help for anything. Liar. Michael thundered, you are nothing more than a liar and a thief. Well, I would more than believe her ripping your eye from you, she would never give you her eye after the betrayal she suffered at your hand. It's your fault that the war happened in the first place. In fact, it's probably due to you taking her eye that she has not returned to us. Watch your tongue, Michael, lest I rip it out. Naruto growled at his unfounded accusations, since if there was one thing he could not stand it was bold-faced lies and biased truths. The mere threat causing Michael to flinch. I was tricked by the morning star, as we all were. You lied to mother, it was you that tricked her. Michael bit back. I never lied to my wife. I merely told her what the morning star had told me. The only trickery that occurred on that day was that of the devil itself. He declared, causing a chill to run down the spines of the numerous angels in attendance as he invoked the title of the morning star after the fall. I refuse to believe such convenient lies. Whether you accept it or not, the blood of millions is on your hands, father. You have taken God from us, dived us with sin, do you truly intend to drag all of heaven down with you as well? Stop this madness, father, lest you bring end to this strenuous peace and undo millennia of progress with your actions. Michael cried as he pleaded with his father, while painting himself as just in his actions. I guess what they say is true, justice is blind. Naruto mocked, causing thunder to ring through heaven as Michael's anger reached new heights. You think you're in the right, you are nothing more than a petulant child trying to fill shoes much too big for you. He taunted only to be met by a saddened expression from Michael, one that filled him with unease. Hanging his head in sorrow, he gave Gabriel a sad smile. I'm sorry, dear sister, but I don't think I'll be able to hold back. He said as the brightness of the javelin in his hand intensified. I must put forth the needs of the many before the needs of the one. He cried as he hefted the javelin of light and launched it at the currently wide-eyed pair, tears streaming freely down his cheeks as the guilt of him having to possibly kill his sister tore him apart inside. His father must not be allowed to leave heaven no matter the cost. The fate of all worlds depended on it. Overwhelmed by the emotional burden of her brother actually intending on striking her down where she stood, Gabriel could only look on fearfully as the full might of God descended upon her. She rooted in place as a construct of holy energy, with the power to strike down a pagan god streaked towards her, its blinding light casting no shadow. Do not fear, my child, she heard echo in her mind as she found her arm moving with a will not her own, for I am always with you. As the spear of light finally reached her, everything seemed to stop before the magical backlash struck everyone in the room, causing several of the angels in attendance to be knocked off their feet and Michael to take a step back as the holy energy rebounded. By the Lord, one of the guardian angels sprawled upon the floor, uttered in awe at the sight in front of him. Impossible, Michael whispered fearfully at the sight in front of him. There, in front of their very eyes, was Gabriel holding Naruto's head at arm's length as the spear of light seemed to arc and bend before his very visage. With his eyes nothing more than streaks of light and his mouth nothing more than an endless white void, Naruto was devouring an attack easily capable of wiping an entire civilization off the face of the earth. An attack of the same caliber that had utterly destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah long ago, being stopped by a being that was theoretically in its weakest state in eons. As the massive amount of holy energy was finally eaten by Naruto as it spiraled down into his gaping maw, it revealed Gabriel to have her eyes closed as her arm trembled hesitantly before her with her father's head in hand. She awaiting the pain she associated with the concept of death to strike her. Blowing out a gust of air in apparent satisfaction at his meal, Naruto spoke, "Little lamb, you can open your eyes now," he said softly to Gabriel, causing her to hesitantly open her eyes, only to be greeted by the sight of a fearful Michael and an awed flock of guardian angels. "Am I dead?" she hesitantly asked as she wasn't quite informed on what happened to angels after they died. "I mean, good people went to heaven when they died, right? So did that mean that good angels also had a chance to go to heaven if they died? What would happen if someone died in heaven and they were supposed to go there after death anyways? Would they simply become ghosts or would they disappear? Would angels that died also disappear?" All these answers she was ignorant of, a good deal of them she suspected her brother could answer. However, she was not one to contemplate on something such as death for long, it simply wasn't in her nature. She was always satisfied with what her mother had told her long ago, that good people that died went to a better place, while the bad people were punished. "No, as if your lovable papa would allow your mean bully of an older brother to kill his currently favorite child," he said loud enough for Michael and the other angels in attendance to hear in order to drive the point home that he was pissed at Michael's actions. "Why would Michael do that, Papa?" Gabriel asked with a frown as she completely ignored everyone else in the room and directed the conversation towards Naruto, figuratively giving everyone else the cold shoulder in the process. "Because he's stupid, that's why," Naruto answered her with all the bluntness of a sledgehammer as he gave Michael a sideways glare. "I mean, he has to be in order to consider pissing me off," he finished before prompting Gabriel to turn him over to fully address Michael. "Wait till your mother hears about this, you trying to kill little Gabby," he said before he shook his head, "you should be ashamed," he chastised, causing Michael to take on an offended expression at that as Naruto tried to label him the villain. "I wish not to harm a hair on her head, it is you that needs to be stopped. However, she seems to have made her choice and has forsaken heaven in favor of you, as such I cannot condone her actions as long as she remains by your side. I do not blame her for this, she is the most kind-hearted pure angel I know," he said fondly as he blessed a currently frowning Gabriel with a smile before looking towards the head in her arms in anger. "No, I blame you. How were you able to survive that attack? It should have been more than sufficient to slay any god, let alone a weakened one," he demanded, he only truly stalling as he sent out telepathic call towards his generals for support in what was looking to be a battle on a scale unprecedented. "You seem to overestimate yourself while underestimating me greatly, child. Even if all of heaven turned against me, I could crush you all without even needing to bare my fangs," Naruto growled as his whisker marks became more prominent and his canines became vicious fangs as he hissed at Michael. However, just then Naruto detected the numerous angels in the other heavens become increasingly agitated through his connection to heaven. Thousands of angels were all converging on their position. It didn't take him long to figure out that Michael had summoned them, it seemed that he was mobilizing all of heaven to stop him from leaving. It was time for him and Gabriel to leave. "Gabriel, it's me, can you hear me?" he said through a mental link with Gabriel. "Daddy, is that you?" she said with a mildly startled expression, this being just as Michael started another diatribe about how this was all necessary. "Yeah, it's me now, listen, the heavens are stirring. There are currently thousands of angels coming here in the next few minutes, and I'm afraid that if we get caught up in such a large-scale conflict, I can't ensure that all of them would be able to survive," he explained, causing her to take on a slightly worried expression on the outside, while on the inside she was panicking. "What do we do? I don't want to hurt the angels, they're my friends. I don't want them to die," she thought fearfully. On one hand she wanted her father to be safe, but on the other, she didn't want to hurt angels that she had spent centuries with. She didn't want to be forced to make such a choice. However, she supposed that if she had to she would choose Naruto. She simply cared too much to let him go, as much as it would kill her inside she would forsake those of the own kind for him. All she could do was hope that if she behaved her father would deem it fit to revive them later on, though it was doubtful considering they were actively acting against him. "Of course I would revive them, Gabriel, it's not their fault after all, it's your idiot of an older brother's fault," Naruto fiercely declared, startling her as she forgot their mental link was still active. "However, that may not be necessary, for you see I have a plan," he said as a menacing grin split his face in the real world, coincidentally at a part that Michael was talking about Naruto's limitations, he skillfully making it look as mocking as possible. You're going to have to follow my instructions to the very letter however, in order to pull this off. Are you sure you want to go through with this? After all there's still time to turn back and I'm pretty sure that even as a head I can still find some way to get out of this. I'm sure she answered without hesitation as she held his head even tighter against her. Okay, here's the plan. Michael's pav. Michael felt a bit of hope blossom in his chest as his father and sister listened to him, maybe he could resolve this peacefully after all. He needn't hurt his father after all, he could simply try to reseal him again and continue to wait for God's return. He was sure that when his mother returned balance would be restored and hopefully his father and the morning star's actions could be undone. Maybe he could even convince his father to part with God's eye and allow him to return it to her when she came back. He truly regretted attacking the two of them, especially Gabriel. He would have to apologize to her for his brash actions, he should have attempted to separate the two before attempting such a thing. At that he thought back on some of their past conversations, maybe it wouldn't be so bad to spend some time with his sister and play with her, if only to make her happy. As he got through to them with his words and carefully thought explanations, he could not help but recall what Gabriel had said about all of them being a family again. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for his father yet. Perhaps they truly could all be together again. Suddenly his body tensed as his senses alerted him to a massive energy construct heading towards him at high speed. Turning towards the pair to regard them he saw his prior attack being launched at him with twice as much power behind it. Or maybe that was mere wishful thinking on his part. Utterly foolish, he uttered as he lifted a single hand towards the attack and crafted a magical circle before it just as the attack came in contact with it. The force of the attack causing his robes to billow under the monumental pressure behind it just before the entire attack flickered out of existence. Suddenly thousands of miles away the attack was forcibly detonated as it was displaced and the massive amount of energy inside of it was released. It detonating with enough force to set the skies aflame and cause the very heavens themselves to tremble as the resulting explosion cleared the cloud coverage for miles in all directions. As the resulting shockwave reached their location, it caused all the windows in the building to shudder in protest as they creaked under the pressure. Michael however was unprepared for the sensation of cold steel, pressing itself upon the nape of his neck immediately afterwards, causing him to go wide-eyed at the unexpected development. Casting his eyes back down to where Gabriel and his father had been mere seconds beforehand, he found the spot vacant and his numerous guards currently unconscious all across the room. How? He asked, honestly surprised on how quickly they had flipped the tables on him. All we needed was a second. We'll be taking our leave now, Michael, and we're taking a bit of heaven with us. Naruto declared as Gabriel pressed the holy blade Ascalon onto the back of his neck while standing behind him. Stringed along her waist being a satchel whose small size did no justice to the numerous holy relics hidden within. You misunderstand the situation then, you act as if you're the ones in control, Michael answered ominously as the sky outside darkened, he being much too relaxed given his current situation for either of them to be comfortable. My life is inconsequential to this situation, my survival of no importance, for I can most certainly assure you that you are in no way in control. He said resolutely just as all light ceased to filter into the room from the numerous windowed archways lining its walls. Father Gabriel whispered worriedly. I know, Naruto responded as he glared knowingly towards the windows, fully aware of what lay beyond them. For the first time since its conception night had fallen over heaven, for outside the throne of God had accumulated all of heaven's armies. So great were their numbers that they blotted out the sky and obscured the sun. They were legion, and as such they acted. Crafting spears of light in hand, the resulting multitude of light bathed the area with all the brilliance of 1,000 suns, and as one they struck. Angels were unique creatures, born from innocence and love itself. They were some of the most pious of supernatural beings in all of existence. They were created to be in every definition of the word, perfect. Molded in the image of divinity and embodying virtue, they represented the ideal in the eyes of their Lord. Yet every single god that had ever created their own heaven-bound children always came to the same conclusion: they lacked something. For as long as they were perfect they too were imperfect, for no matter how visually pleasing or virtuous their creations, they in the eyes of their creators, remained nothing more than dolls of flesh and bone. Soulless they abided to their every command, for the word of God was law, and as such it was righteous. They doubted nothing, their faith unwavering, their resolve unshakable. They would die on the word of God alone. Humans as imperfect as they were brought all righteous gods great joy when they managed to overcome sin, temptation, and the numerous tribulations that deemed fit to test them time and time again. They born innocent and imperfect felt more complete than their perfect angels. So many gods had decided that their heaven-born children too deserved free will, that their faith be tested, that their innocence be proven through pious devotion, rather than it merely being inherent within them, and so angels' souls were unbound. Yet their ingrained values remained and all remained faithful to God, all except one. The morning star. Its full would herald the fall of countless others. However, the fact remained that the moment that God gave upon the angels free will, she made angels imperfect. For she gave them things outside of her control. She gave them a true sense of self, identified them all as individually distinct from one another. Most importantly, however, she allowed them the capacity to think for themselves, and with that came doubt, with that came temptation, with that came sin. But the need to protect angels from such things, certain safeguards and countermeasures, had to be put in place as a precautionary measure, and so the heaven system came to be. Before singular to its unique role of casting miracles, blessing holy objects, and deigning who was worthy of salvation. It was soon amended with the ability to supervise and monitor all angels, as well as it bearing several countermeasures in order to prevent the falling of angels. However, one thing about it that was neglected was how this interconnectivity plays out, of how such a system is truly capable of existing, and moreover its effects on free will. The fact is that its effects were all-encompassing, it being the very heart of heaven itself. Every angel was connected at all times to the heaven system, for it was there that they drew most of their power, for there they could feed off faith. Its most important attribute, however, was how it affected free will. When angels congregated, the connection was amplified as they slowly became part of something much greater than them. For them it was as if they were one with God itself. Their sense of self fading away as they temporarily became part of a collective. No longer were they one, they were many. They were legion. It was this hive mind of theirs that allowed them the capability of acting in tandem, as they all formed spears of light in hand at exactly the same time. That allowed them to rain down thousands of light spears with perfect precision, as the heaven system automatically corrected their attack's course trajectory, so they would not collide with one another. Which made it possible to fly in flocks of thousands, and perform complex aerial maneuvers without risk of crashing into one another in the process. However, as they rained volley after volley of light spears down upon the cathedral where God's throne resided, they found their mounting apprehension and their worry for their Lord seeping into their every thought, their every action. Michael was facing off against the progenitor, and they feared that their actions may bring more harm than good upon the two archangels currently in attendance. The angels soon enough found their resolve wavering as they cast their spears of light down from the heavens, they continuing to strike the throne, which had at this point been obscured from sight by large wispy clouds that seemed to have been created from their massive onslaught. It was when the first light spear collided with another that one of the heavenly generals held out his hand to signal them to stop, as the heaven system seemed to be causing the vast majority of the angels to share amongst one another their grief of possibly harming their Lord. They knew he was still alive due to them still being interconnected, but the thought of actually harming their Lord, even under his command, brought great distress to all but the most loyal of angels. Those few being the ones that would follow God's word to the letter no matter what it may be. The general, an angel clad in armor inlaid with silver and gold who had 10 majestic white wings upon his back, gazed down at the establishment with mounting apprehension. His eyes narrowing ever so slightly behind his helmet as he prepared for the worst. His powerful build was covered from head to toe in intricate armor, with numerous depictions of faith, sacrifice, and valor engraved into the metal. He who had fought in the front lines of the Great War under God and had in her name slayed thousands, was one of heaven's greatest generals who led her vast armies. He being the one that had been selected to lead this operation. However, as he looked on at the sight that greeted him as the clouds blew over, his eyes widened. There, standing as if had not just been assaulted by hundreds of thousands of light spears, was the cathedral that housed God's throne. Impossible, the general muttered under breath as he signaled one of his fellow cohorts, prompting the female general to break of a small regiment, which proceeded to launch a single volley of light spears at the cathedral. Forming a light spear of his own in hand, the current leader of heaven's armies cast it down from the skies as it streaked downwards with all the force of a lightning bolt. However, upon the multitude of spears of light reaching the cathedral, they were all halted mid-air as the area below each spear rippled and they started to be absorbed into a barrier of sorts. As the general's spear crashed into the barrier right after the initial volley, it sent out massive waves across the entirety of the barrier, revealing it to be in the form of a large dome around the establishment. This being just as it absorbed the other light spears and set about pulling his own one in. An energy barrier, the general thought with a frown, just as his eyes widened as he saw the wave his attack had created echo back and numerous spears of light start to peek through the barrier's surface, they seemingly reappearing out of thin air as the area around each rippled. Scatter. He roared at the forces just as thousands of light spears were shot back at them. However, the composition of the holy energy within was such that rather than cause physical damage, it ghosted through them, stripping them of their holy energy in the process and causing them to plummet from the heavens by the hundreds as they attempted to evade the seemingly endless barrage. Paladins. The general barked out, causing numerous bulky bronze giants to come to the front of the formations, they bringing to bear massive crusader shields with a large blood-red cross inlaid into the metalwork. The now named paladins being able to take on the brunt of the attacks due to the special properties of their shields. Both male and female paladins were easily larger than their equally stalwart brethren, they towering over most others as even the shortest amongst them were over 7 feet tall. Their armors were bereft of the usual intricacies and markings of angel armor, rank did not exist amongst them, and they had all sworn oaths of silence at the beginning of their service. The only thing denoting their position was the fact that all of them carried the Crusader mark, their tall stature, and their massive shields. Leading these formidable warriors were the 12 peers, angelic saints that had committed their very existence towards the willful devotion of God. Clad not in armor, but in intricate hooded robes that obscured their faces in shadow, they wielded not a shield, but a massive two-handed claymore with numerous glowing runes, trailing along the length blade. Holding their blades out at arm's length, large magical barriers formed before them. They having positioned themselves in such a way that each of them covered the maximum amount of area possible, without causing their barriers to overlap. The gaps in their defenses quickly being filled out by the paladins as they altered their formation to accommodate the 12 peers and allow them to intercept the massive onslaught of light spears. The general quickly took stock of their losses, thanks to his warning and the paladins' timely actions they had managed to limit it to only about 1200. However, this was of little comfort as he knew that they had gained absolutely no ground to show for it. Casting a furtive glance towards God's throne as he noticed the number of light spears being emitted by the barrier diminish, he decided they would need to take a more direct approach if they hoped to be able to aid their lord. The spears seemed to be being fired in volleys as they had initially launched them, which meant that there were going to be brief periods where they would thin out. Summoning one of his fastest messenger angels to his side, a young man with black hair and a thin athletic body, he merely looked at him for a moment before pointing at the cathedral. Though he ordered and with a flap of his wings, the messenger angel disappeared as he shot past him and through the veritable wall of paladins. As the messenger angel maneuvered himself around the numerous light spears still being fired whilst he made his descent, his eyes burned an ominous gold as he used his God-given skills to calculate the trajectory of the numerous projectiles in his path. Spiraling downwards as he skillfully managed to breach a gap in the last volley of light spears, he continued his descent as he folded his wings against himself, further hastening his fall. As the angel's heart thumped loudly in his chest and the wind whistled past his ears, his eyes were set firmly onto his destination. A lone circular stained glass window directly above where God's throne resided inside the towering cathedral, it depicting an angel with its arms reaching outwards as if to embrace him. Shooting through the barrier he could feel his energy being stripped from him, the agonizing sensation of his flesh searing off him as blood dripped down freely from his brow. With tears streaming down his cheeks as his wings were set ablaze, he braved through it all, incessant and unrelenting. The sensation being of such agony that it was akin to being burned for heresy at the pyre the flames of hell, seeming nothing more than a mere respite to his current anguish. Yet the angel did not cry out in pain. Even as the smell of his own burning flesh assaulted his nostrils, even as his holy energy left him and he grew weak and brittle, he did not fall. For he knew. He was not alone. With him were all his brothers and sisters, with him was his faith, with him was God. So it was that with his halo stained with his own blood, his wings aflame, and his flesh charred that he reached out towards the open arms of the glass angel before him as he spread his wings for the very last time. Sixth heaven, God's throne. Michael had played his cards perfectly. Naruto had not thought Michael to be capable of placing his own life, nor those of the unconscious angels in attendance, on the line simply to stop him. It almost frightened him to think that Michael was more than willing to die simply to keep him bound by the will of heaven. Such zealous faith and fervent devotion actually instilled a deep-seated apprehension within him as he contemplated on how the world of man had progressed under the watch of someone such as him. How had Michael maintained faith in God after she disappeared? If the road to hell was paved with good intentions, why was it that all that he could picture leading to heaven was a road of thorns? What had his son done? Where were his brethren? Something was horribly wrong. That look that Michael had cast upon him when he first laid eyes on him was not one of hatred or resentment, but of dread. Such eyes were not the eyes of the Michael he had once known, no, it was as if he had gazed into hell itself and bore witness to unspeakable evil. He could not help but feel as he gazed into his eyes that Michael knew too much, so much so that he was almost weighed down by the sins of others. In fact, he could tell from his reaction alone that he knew something concerning him that even he was ignorant of. Michael had spoken of him being sealed. Did that mean that he knew of the actual circumstances behind his disappearance? No, that was impossible. Only he and his wife knew of the true circumstances following the fall of the morning star and his subsequent isolation. He, however, seemed to have some sort of insight onto the matter. Could Michael have eaten from the tree of knowledge? Looking apprehensively towards the satchel hanging from Gabriel's waist for a mere second, Naruto quickly discarded such thoughts. If Michael had partaken of the fruit, he would have fallen instantly. No, his knowledge came from elsewhere. However, such thoughts would have to be addressed later, for he had more pressing matters to attend to. In a moment darkness had fallen over the cathedral that housed God's throne, and another light had returned as it flooded through every window in the room. The stained glass directly behind them bathing the room in a wide array of colors as it seemed like the sun itself was intent on crashing down upon them. The assembled group could feel the numerous light spears being formed before they were all cast down simultaneously. There must have been thousands of them, all individually distinct and corresponding to the individual that had crafted them. Naruto could feel Gabriel tense beside him as she felt the massive release of energy, she knowing full well that neither her nor her brother would likely survive such an assault unless one of them was capable of taking the necessary measures to counter it. However, the moment one did the other was sure to strike at the opening that it would provide them they were at an impasse. At least that would be the case if Naruto wasn't here, but who was to say that Michael hadn't somehow taken this into account as well. Michael had yet to move and seemed to show absolutely no concern for his own life as he currently had his back to them. Gabriel likewise was reluctant to even look away from her brother lest he take advantage of it. Her brother had firmly maintained his position as the most powerful force in all of heaven for a reason after all. That and she wasn't so willing to give up her hostage at the moment. If they wanted to get out of heaven without killing any angels, they would have to maintain their current advantage and keep him as a bargaining chip. Their plan depended on it, however with the current way things were going she was starting to wonder if such a plan would work at all. In other words this left Naruto as the only one capable of taking action at the moment, and act he did. His Rinnegan eye glowing an ominous amethyst as the entirety of the cathedral shook around them, he instantly created a massive barrier encompassing the cathedral, this being mere moments before thousands of light spears impacted into it at exactly the same time. Naruto was unable to withhold the flinch as his barrier in a mere instant deciphered and started assimilating the thousands of different energy frequencies and set about converting it into a non-lethal form. The massive amount of energy signatures that he had to decipher at the exact same time managing to actually pose more of a problem than the actual energy he was absorbing into the barrier. That however was exactly what Michael was banking on, that one moment that Naruto managed to lose his concentration. It was for that reason that he had ordered his angels to attack at the same time in volleys rather than a continuous barrage. The energy itself was little more than a hindrance to his father, but energy frequencies were distinct, and even his father could be spread too thin for a second when presented with such large numbers. The fact that his sister could not help but cast a side glance at their father in worry was also well within his calculations. In an instant he altered his footing as he ducked just as his Gabriel thrust Ascalon forward on reflex in response, her eyes widening as she overshot him. In a split second he used his left hand to push her sword hand out of the way and made her lose her balance while he span around just as he crafted a Longinus level spear of light in hand. This spear if thrown had enough destructive power to consume an entire continent in the ensuing explosion and could theoretically slay a god. Surely it would take even someone of his father's caliber a good deal of time to recover from such an attack, hopefully enough time. It all had happened in a mere blink of an eye. For just as his father had only needed a second to turn the tables on him, he too only needed a second to do the same. So when his father managed to reopen his eyes he was met with the sight a spear of super compressed holy energy, mere inches from his face, it set to go though his left eye and continue on to pierce right through his skull. After all he still had to tear out his mother's eye from his skull in order to hasten up her recovery, it would not do to destroy it in the process of taking care of his father. Naruto only had time for his eyes to widen slightly at the sight before a spray of blood stained the ground behind him. What? Michael voiced in shock at the sight before him, for the blood that currently dripped down his spear was not that of his father, but of his sister. Gabriel seeing what Michael had intended to do, had quickly released her father's head and let it fall as she allowed the spear to tear through the palm of her hand. However rather than cry out in pain, she merely continued to slide her hand along the spear before she grasped it in hand when she was mere inches away from his face. She completely uncaring of the fact it was eating away at her flesh as she did so. It was then, as her burning gaze met his own disbelieving one, that he knew he had made a mistake. For he had left out one crucial detail in his calculations. The spear of light seemed to crack and splinter under her grip as she firmly held it in place whilst looking him straight in the eye, the action greatly intimidating him, as for no matter how hard he tried to pull the spear free, he yielded no ground. As he gazed at her with mounting apprehension he was met not with his bubbly younger sister, but the most powerful female in all of heaven. Her eyes seething with righteous fury as she gazed into his own suddenly apprehensive ones. He hated to say it, but while he may outclass his sister in terms of raw power, when it came to skill she was without equal in all of heaven. Yanking on the light spear and causing him to stumble forwards, Michael was unprepared for the brutal kick to his midriff, it sending him careening backwards as he lost his grip on his own spear of light. He leaving it firmly in her grasp as he skidded and skipped along the marble flooring whilst cracking ancient depictions of faith with every rebound. Managing to dig his claws into the marble mosaic underhand as he tore straight through the depictions from the Old Testament, he spread his wings behind him in order to bring himself to a stop as he glared at his sibling. She standing impassively at the foot of his throne. Her gaze one of apparent disinterest as she looked at him imperiously, as if she herself were regarding a mere fallen angel, rather than it nearly being the other way around. Casting a meager glance to the spear currently embedded into the palm of her hand, it was to his great surprise that he saw his sister clench her hand and crush what was meant to be a god-killer level attack into nothing. Deciding to not allow them to take the upper hand again, Michael quickly crafted about 100 spears of light from thin air as his eyes glowed white with power. The spears spinning themselves out of spheres of holy energy as they elongated and settled into a vicious point. However, he was fully unprepared for the pressure that suddenly impacted him and sent him blasting backwards once more. The action eliciting a gasp of pain from him as he was slammed full force into the stone archway above the door nearly 15 feet off the ground, it being as if he were being crucified as it looked like even his wings were nailed to the wall. It was only through sheer force of will that he was able to lower his head enough to look down towards God's throne. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth as whatever attack that was holding him in place applied similar pressure to his organs, the coppery taste of it trailing over his tongue as he attempted to speak. "How?" he muttered weakly just as the spears of light that he had created moments prior fizzled out of existence. He never having seen Gabriel even move, which meant it must have been. "Now that wasn't very nice," Michael heard his father drawl out, causing him to look towards where his father's head should have fallen only for his eyes widen. Michael could only look on in disbelief to see his father's head suspended upside down in midair a good 2 feet off the ground. "What would you have done if you got my hair dirty, you idiot?" Naruto remarked as he regarded Michael with an annoyed expression, just as some invisible force righted him and a smirk appeared on his face. "Not only that, you also went so far as to hurt Gabriel as well," Naruto said thoughtfully as he cast a side glance towards the hole in Gabriel's hand. "This merely a flesh wound, father, it should be healed in no more than a fortnight," Gabriel said dismissively, her bubbly tone gone and replaced with that of a seasoned warrior as she glared daggers at her brother. 2 weeks, Naruto said in surprise as his eyes widened. "That long a wound that small should take you no more than a few minutes," he exclaimed in alarm. Michael's attack was far more powerful than I had previously anticipated. "It appears that he fully intended to incapacitate you, father. It will take longer than normal for it to heal, and since my connection has been severed from the heaven system, I can't afford to risk myself expending the necessary energy to mend it at the moment," Gabriel informed him whilst not breaking her glare away from her brother. Gabriel's blood trickling freely onto the ground as her hand gave involuntary spasms every now and then. Her holy energy could be seen working furiously on sealing the wound, but doing nothing to mend it. Given the large hole in her palm at the moment, it was doubtful that she would be using that particular hand anytime soon. "Shit," Naruto cursed, "the very act near blasphemous considering their current location. Another reason for me to kick your ass, Michael," Naruto commented as he glared dangerously at a nervous Michael. Michael at this point could easily see that the odds were stacked against him and his window of opportunity had passed. He was currently facing his sister, an archangel that was almost on par with him power-wise, and his father the progenitor. There was no way he could win. His best bet was hoping that his brother and sisters could make it in time or that another opportunity presented itself. If the archangels still aligned with him could work together, it was more than possible that they would be able to separate his father from Gabriel and take advantage of his father's current condition to find a way to seal him. After all, they knew the circumstances concerning his father as well as he did. The Celestial Covenant was clear on its purpose after all. However, Gabriel was one of the most fiercely devoted of all his children. It was well within the realm of plausibility that she would not mind seeing the world burn as long as she could be by her father's side through it all, hence why they had kept her in the dark and neglected to inform her of such things. As it was, however, "Grit your teeth, Michael, I wouldn't want your mother yelling at me for messing up your pretty little face," Naruto commented with a sinister grin as his eyes glowed ominously, the mental image of his father cracking his knuckles as he said that being all too prevalent in Michael's thoughts. Michael, not being able to move at the moment, thought it in his best interests to comply with the demand. In an instant he found himself being pulled forwards by an unseen force towards the two of them, this however having the added effect of releasing him from his prior invisible restraints. Taking advantage of his current speed, he crafted a magical circle mere meters in front of him and used the thermal updraft it was creating to propel himself upwards using his wings. He quickly creating a light spear in hand and launching it at high speed towards his father. However, to his utter bewilderment, some invisible force seemed to strike it out of the air the instant it got within a certain proximity of him. His father only smiling impishly at his failed effort. This was ridiculous. How could he hope to defeat his father when he didn't even have the slightest inkling as to how he was currently doing the things he did? He knew that while his eyes could emulate his powers, they were not wholly necessary towards their implementation, which meant that unless he knew the mechanics behind it, there was no way he could ever hope to counter such an attack. Seeing his sister point 2 fingers heavenward, he was unprepared as he was suddenly slammed into the intricate fresco above, cracking the elaborate renditions from the Book of Genesis decorating it. Blood spewing from his lips from the momentous force of the impact, he could not help looking at his sister in utter disbelief. It was impossible, she should not be capable of such things. None of the angels had ever been able to successfully employ telekinetic magic with such precision, especially without the utilization of magical arrays. Only their father had. His eyes widened as his gaze settled upon his father from above, the sensation of his throat constricting all too prevalent at the moment, yet immobile as he was, he could not even clutch at his throat. He didn't understand, how was his sister capable of doing this when she had never displayed such aptitude with the mind arts before? Such skill and precision was not something that could merely spring forth at a moment's notice. No, maybe he was looking at this the wrong way, he thought as his eyes trailed back towards his smirking father, only for his eyes to widen. That's it. Lumen Mora Michael managed to invoke, causing Naruto and Gabriel's eyes to widen before they hurried to shield their eyes. This being just as the entirety of God's throne was consumed in a blinding white light as one of God's private dimensions temporarily invaded the current one for a moment. Due to this, Michael was able to make out the twisted shadowy figure mere inches in front of his face, with its hand currently wrapped around his throat. In this world of light it looked like nothing more than a sheer black shadow, its form twisting and writhing as it gazed at him with ruby red eyes that bore numerous ripples upon them. The monstrous maw set upon its face that seemed to devour the light around it as it seemingly regarded him with a dark grin. It was his father. His father had more than one body. Lumen Mora. Michael could not help the fear that suddenly wormed itself into his heart at the current state of affairs he found himself in. He was out of time, Lumen Mora was only a temporary measure that would only last a few minutes at most, and the moment that it ceased the fight would be over. The news that his father had more than one body locked away in other dimensions was disconcerting, however one single fact kept him from losing hope. They apparently existed only in this private dimension of his, and he seemed incapable of mending his physical body in this dimension using them. For if he could, then why hadn't he already? However, he wouldn't put it by his father to simply want to defeat him as a head, simply to spite him. After all, he did state that he could defeat all of heaven as merely head without even exerting any real effort, and seemed to be doing a grand job of it so far. However, this presented another issue to him. There was no way his mother did not know of the existence of these other bodies of his, and given the fact that she had been in possession of one of his eyes, then she should have had the opportunity to either seal them away or destroy them. That arose the question though, why didn't she? He wasn't liking what he was seeing, the picture was becoming increasingly more convoluted with every new variable that was added to this already defunct equation. Nothing made any sense anymore. The only reason that she would leave her eye with him, the only reason that she would leave him such powerful abilities at his disposal and not tear out his other eye, was if. Suddenly his eyes widened in horror as he started shaking uncontrollably, a shiver running down his spine at the only possible conclusion he could arrive to. God had forsaken humanity in the name of love. His mother had chosen his father over the entirety of humanity and the supernatural world. In an instant his idealistic image of his mother came crashing down around him. It all suddenly made sense, his mother and father were working together from the start. His father merely playing along with the decapitation and she carrying it out in order to cover up the incident after things went awry with the Morning Star. In fact, in all likelihood they probably simply used that as an excuse in order to disenchant others from prying any further into the matter and what she did with him. The two of them having taken preemptive measures already before the Celestial Covenant was established and action could be taken. His mother, who had been prophesied to die in the war, had survived using his eye. His father, who was meant to be weakened and sealed, was still beyond realms of power the likes of which the world had never seen. Collaborating together they had tricked everyone with their perfect performance, this being the only way their love could be preserved with the way the current state of affairs at the time were. They had twisted fate, cheated death, and fooled every single supernatural being in existence with their majestic performance. The perfect tragic romance, one of twisted love and vengeful retribution, rivaling the likes of Romeo and Juliet themselves. They had transitioned to their roles perfectly and carried them out flawlessly. It was too much for Michael to take that the hundreds of years he spent under his mother's watchful eye after his father's disappearance were nothing more than a meager performance. That the very teachings that she had sought to imbue into him she herself had failed to follow. Her selfishness overtaking her selflessness. No, he refused to believe such ill-begotten thought. His mother would never go so far as to abandon all her children and creations, all for her own selfish love. But if she did? A cynical part of his own shattered psyche questioned, only to just as quickly be met with a response. If she did, then I will aspire to be a better god than she ever was, one that does not forsake their own morals and partakes of hypocrisy by neglecting their own teachings. One that does not abandon his people. A god worthy of humanity's faith and who is willing to go any length to preserve their peace. No longer will I merely conform to the role of god, no, rather I shall not only supersede my predecessor, but surpass her as well. Michael decided, he not knowing how much his line of thinking fell in step with other angels that had been stricken down from the very heavens for such blasphemy. However, due to the absence of God and him currently being in control of the heaven system, as well as having taken up the mantle of the leader of heaven beforehand, he did not fall. For his thoughts, no matter how blasphemous, only reaffirmed his current position. He was no usurper, for he already held the title and ruled the kingdom. The difference. He wasn't going to give it up now, even if his mother did come back from wherever she resided. She would have to tear the position of God from his very hands before he allowed someone that did not have the best interests of the people before their own rule over the heavens. The part of himself fervently denied such thought, wishing it not to be true and hoping against hope that such a thing forever remained solely within the realm of speculation. However, a much larger, more logical part of him could not deny the overwhelming evidence currently supporting the contrary. Discarding such thoughts for the moment, he decided to address the situation at hand. He only had a handful more seconds until Lumen Mora ceased, and when that happened the pressure currently applied to his throat as his larynx was constricted by the monstrous shadow of his father would return full force. He would have mere seconds after the flow of time returned to normal to get out of its grip before he was knocked unconscious. First up, the shadows, they did not exist physically in the real world. Rather, they existed in a different dimensional plane from their own that he was only able to gaze upon due to his own light dimension overlapping with their current one. Casting a side glance across the room, he could make out at least one more to be currently holding his father's head, giving him the appearance that he was levitating in their current dimension. That meant there was 2, possibly 3 shadows. At least if his previous light spear had been knocked out of the air by another shadow from the one currently choking him and not by one of his father's other abilities. He had one chance to get out of his current situation. If his current guess as to the nature of these shadows were wrong, then he would be at his father's mercy, but if he wasn't, then he had just found his opportunity. Michael could feel the constricting feeling around his throat returning as time resumed to flow normally, he managing to see the shadow's grin widen slightly, just as his ability to see it through his light dimension fully faded away. He was unprepared, however, for when the now invisible shadow pulled him backward slightly before slamming him back once more into the elaborate fresco behind him in apparent punishment for his resistance. The action cracking the entirety of Genesis and causing rubble to rain down freely from above as he weakly clung to consciousness. Michael's golden feathers raining down from the force of the assault as he was slammed back into the ruined fresco again and again as Naruto laughed insanely in the background. Gabriel herself not being able to withhold her flinch each and every time it happened, yet not interfering as she knew that this was likely the way that would instill the least lasting damage upon Michael in order to stop him. After all, it was impossible to seal him away due to the nature of his bond to the heaven system, anchoring him to this particular dimension. Gabriel's eyes, however, widened upon seeing one of the feathers drifting down before her, she quickly grabbing hold of her father's head and protectively pulling him towards her chest, just as a series of explosions tore through God's throne as the numerous feathers detonated. This having the added effect of allowing Michael to escape from the shadow's grasp. "I understand everything now," Michael announced in a hollow voice as he landed directly across from them with a dull look in his eyes, blood trailing freely down his brow. His announcement coming just as the smoke from the explosion cleared, revealing a giant pair of wings sprouting from his sister's back that she had used to shield from the attack. She turning around with her father's head in hand as her wings disappeared in a burst of light, leaving only falling feathers in its wake. "Oh, do you now? What do you understand exactly? Have you possibly started to comprehend the disparity in power between us?" Naruto questioned with a mocking smirk, honestly a tad bit curious at what his son could be going on about. "You are employing nothing more than mere parlor tricks in this conflict. You have your doppelgangers sealed off in a separate dimension and are having them aid you in performing these seemingly impossible feats of yours. A false god through and through, you instructed Gabriel using your mental link to act along and had her display similar feats that defied the imagination. This being in order to implant the thought that you could defeat me without even putting forth the barest amount of effort and discourage me from even trying. However, you disregarded one thing out of your calculations, father." Michael spat with a glare as he clutched his robes in hand. "Oh, and what is that?" Naruto asked with the same ever-present smirk still upon his face, he displaying no hint of worry as he said this. Gabriel on the other hand looked shocked at her brother, having figured all of this out so quickly, she was sure if the situation was reversed, she couldn't have possibly figured it out that fast. Smirking himself at the question, he quickly discarded his robes in one swift motion, surprising Naruto at the action. "Like you, I never give up," he declared just as his robes caught on one of the shadows before he directly intercepted the attacks of the two other clones on either side of him, he catching them both completely off guard in the process as he managed to strike them physically. The two clones' eyes widening as they flickered in and out of existence for a moment before they disappeared once again as they were sent crashing into either adjacent wall. "What the crap?" Naruto eloquently exclaimed upon seeing the seemingly impossible happen. He had never predicted the possibility of Michael seeing, let alone touching, his shadows in the limbo dimension. Only his wife should be capable of such a feat. Spinning around on his heel, Michael kicked off the ground before landing a kick to the side of the last shadow's skull, the attack sending it blasting backwards as it crashed straight through God's throne. Michael, landing in a crouch before he righted himself, revealed himself to be clad in a strange golden armor that seemed to permeate with massive amounts of holy energy lightning seemingly arsing around his powerful frame. Calming himself slightly, Naruto asked the question most prominent in his mind at the moment, "How did you figure it out?" His tone making it sound more like an order than a mere question, not that Michael noticed. "Simple, my first clue towards something being amiss was Gabriel's sudden ability to employ gravity and telekinetic magic, as she had not displayed any skill in either prior to this. My second and most important clue was that you possessed a full shadow rather than that of a mere head when you were floating earlier." He explained as he decided to humor his father whilst waiting for his forces to arrive. "These two facts allowed me to infer that there was possibly another being in some other dimension aiding you. Using Mother's Lumen Mora, I was able to confirm their existence by overlapping her light dimension over the current one. Doing so, I was able to determine that your doppelgangers, while still invisible in the real world, still possess a shadow and have to temporarily physically interact with this dimensional plane in order to strike." At this point he held out 5 fingers towards the pair as he addressed a worried-looking Gabriel and a stone-faced Naruto. 5 seconds, he declared as he gazed into the apathetic eyes of his father. "Your clones have a 5-second window after they become physical in which to strike." Naruto merely narrowed his eyes at this, while Gabriel was looking more and more apprehensive with each passing second. "Then there was merely the fact to address that since your shadows exist in a separate dimension from our own, I needed a way to strike them, which is how I came to the conclusion of utilizing these," he said just as he assigned his general outside his father's barrier with a new order, he crafting a magical circle in hand in the process. "An energy transference array," Naruto observed emotionlessly. "Yes, well, I myself may not be able to enter your private dimension, energy is boundless, and since your shadows are crossing over into my dimension in order to strike, I am able to strike back," he fiercely declared as he clenched his fist and crushed the magical array underhand. Silence reigned after his reveal, he having thoroughly picked apart Naruto's technique and seemingly come up with a countermeasure towards it. "Very impressive, Michael, your skills of observation astound me," Naruto replied condescendingly. "I do believe that the best course of action at this point would be a strategic retreat on my part now that you've seen right through me," Naruto proclaimed with a Joker's grin that caused a shiver to run down Michael's spine at that. "However, before I go, I must thank you," Naruto smiled as Michael noticed the rubble where he had sent each of the shadows shift, his eyes widening as he observed the shadows of the doppelgangers seemingly fade away and disappear before his very eyes. "It was quite self-righteous of you to point out the flaws in my technique like that. Why, if you hadn't informed me of them, it was very possible that they could have gone unnoticed and someone with enough cunning could have taken advantage of them," he mocked just as he shuffled his shadows across multiple dimensions so that it would be impossible to attack more than one at a time. All throughout this, Michael's eyes continued to progressively widen as his sole advantage in the situation was seemingly stripped away before his very eyes. Why had he pointed out his advantage in such a blasé manner? It wasn't like him at all to do so, however for some reason he had done so, feeling as if he had to tell him in order to stall for his forces to arrive. That was when he recalled it, his father's command. "How did you figure it out?" He had initially disregarded it as nothing more than a mere inquiry, but in retrospect it had come across as more of an order. That was when his eyes widened in realization. His father had used his magic to manipulate his mind into a false sense of security as he was subconsciously prompted to comply with the command. His father was already inside his head. Turning inwards towards his mind's eye, an image manifested itself upon his realization. That of a single purplish-gray ringed eye that seemed to gaze at him amusedly. It widening as the entirety of his mindscape was flooded by numerous red eyes, each with 3 spiraling tama within them. The tama slowly bleeding into one another as they prepared to take on a different shape. Knowing what was going on and what allowing them to complete their rotation could bring, he quickly sealed off his entire mindscape, allowing him to return to the real world where seemingly no time at all had passed. His instincts, however, all suddenly screamed at him to block. Doing so, he was able to block an invisible blow using an energy transference array. He seemed to have escaped quicker than I had anticipated, and here I was hoping that he would be trapped there for a while, so that we could leave. Michael heard Naruto idly comment, turning towards where the voice came from. He was quickly met to a punch to the face that knocked him off his feet and sent him crashing into the ground. Attempting to get back up, Michael was struck by a swift kick to his ribs that sent him careening even further away from where Naruto and Gabriel currently were. All throughout this his mind was furiously working to decipher the situation. His father had managed to worm himself into his subconscious, using one of the many odd abilities at his disposal. This one likely ocular-based. However, the fact remained that he had been manipulating his conscious thought for a while, using it, which meant his eyes widened, he having yet to make any effort to get up as he attempted to digest this new information. His commands to his forces, they were manifested by his father. His father wanted them to come assist him, to go through his barrier, and suddenly he felt a foot grind itself into his cheek, he subconsciously knowing that it was likely one of his father's shadows. You know, all I do is an act of love, Michael. Some people see inflicting pain upon others as an act of love, so surely me hurting you is an act of love as well. Naruto said brokenly as he turned Michael's head with his foot towards the throne, only for him to see Gabriel holding his father's head in her arms, he gazing down at him sadly. The thing is, if I hated you, I could have killed you hundreds of times already. I could have erased you from existence or trapped you in an endless hell of my own creation, whereupon you would have suffered unspeakable atrocities the likes of which you can scarcely imagine. He whispered in a voice that seemed to radiate power, his lips not moving, but his soft voice seeming to be coming from right beside his ear. I love you, son, I don't want to hurt you, but I will. Out of love. It is for this reason I haven't caused you any lasting damage, which none of your angels have died, and most importantly it is for this very reason that I am still abiding by the law of 2/3. He said ominously, his tone nothing more than a deathly whisper that seemed to be echoing from the invisible shadow looming over him. Every word it spoke further discouraging him as he started to realize that he truly had never had a chance all along, as he started to give into despair. Lumen Virgo, Michael intoned as he caused the current illusion he was in to shatter, revealing him to have been standing exactly where he had been prior to being struck after leaving his mindscape. You're mistaken to think that he who overlooks the heavens would ever lose faith, Michael announced with a fierceness that surprised Naruto. This being mere moments before an angel crashed through the stained glass window directly above Gabriel and Naruto. Gabriel extending a single wing to shield them from the shards of glass that rained down from above. The hell? Naruto exclaimed in shock just as Gabriel retracted her wing, revealing a lone angel to currently be perched upon the round frame of the window above them. However, upon settling his gaze upon the angel, Naruto's eyes widened at seeing it to be barely clinging on to life. Even Michael could not help but look on in utter disbelief as he saw one of his winged messengers look like a herald of death itself. The angel's skeletal wings clinging on to the barest of plumage as numerous smoldering feathers danced around him. The angel's flesh seeming to be barely clinging to bone as he looked to have been cooked alive and burned to a simmer. His eyes were dull and devoid of life, his gaze blank and unseeing. Yet for some reason he seemed to hold reserves of inner strength the likes of which Michael had never seen. Even whilst looking as frail and brittle as he did, he seemed to tower over them like the most unconquerable of mountains. The vessel of faith, he was not alone, for with him was all the forces of heaven as he shouldered their hopes on his broken wings. We're out of time, Naruto whispered to Gabriel, who could only clench her jaw in understanding. Cleansed in blood and baptized by fire, the angel gazed down upon them for but a moment before letting out a cry of such bitter anguish that it shook the heavens and tore the skies asunder. The cry being such that it caused every window in the church to implode as glass rained down freely all around them. Instantly Naruto felt his barrier collapse as the lone angel, using the heaven system, reconnected with the rest of heaven's armies, and the massive influx of holy energy from all of them allowed them to nullify his barrier. The lone angel's cry being met by a roar as all the forces of heaven descended upon them and stormed God's castle. Guided by faith and supported in mass, they struck fierce and true with an unholy fervor the likes of which even Michael himself had never bore witness to. No matter how many of them fell, how many of them died, they would not falter. For until the last angel was finally struck down from the heavens, they would fight. In order to ensure peace and prosperity for all, the progenitor must fall. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.